So, thank you for that, Vajrachakshu. Yeah, it's quite kind of strong to hear what somebody else thinks of you, especially if it's not quite the way that you see yourself. So thank you for that. I remember, actually, it reminds me that I remember, actually, before I start that, Vajrachakshu asked me if I would time myself. So I'm just going to put the clock on. Yeah, your introduction, Vajrachakshu, reminded me of a teacher that I once had when I was 15 or 16. And that teacher was really pivotal and important to me, because at the time I was going through a pretty hard time one way or another, and I didn't have the supports in place then that I do now. And what that teacher provided for me was she believed in me, and she could see in me what I couldn't see in myself. And because I trusted her, I couldn't ignore what it was that she was saying. And I think your introduction really points to how valuable being a friend, a true friend to people can be, from which it's possible not only to see oneself, but to be in relationship to others. So thank you for the introduction. So I thought I'd start with a little bit of an introduction and myself, and say hi. I hope that you're all in good health and finding the support and nourishment that you need during this time at all levels, on a material and external level, and also on a deeply heartfelt level. And whatever life seeks to involve you in, I really hope that your experience includes friendship, the kind just mentioned a few moments ago, really, a sense of connection, felt connection, kindness, and some freedom of heart. Yeah. And whatever happens next, I hope that you continue to pursue whatever it is that's important for you, and seek to find that which supports you in ways that are kind and friendly and loving. So my name's Ambaranta. I was ordained within the Triratna Buddhist order in 2007. It's interesting, when I put this because I spoke what I'd written into my phone, which is the first time I've done it. And it obviously doesn't understand my voice very well. So when I said my name is Ambaranta, and I was ordained within Triratna Buddhist order in 2007, it said, Amber, answer, and I'm all drained within the Triratna community, which I thought was, well, I thought it was enough to write it down. Yeah. I've been involved in the order since 2007, but I've always had an engagement in something that looks, it wasn't labeled Buddhism, but it was a quest for meaning and also for social change. So the task that I've been gifted is to talk about the shadow, and I've chosen to look at that in a way that explores how we can see clearly see clearly in the dark. And right now, I acknowledge that this is the only time that I can speak, and this is the only time I can do it. Whatever's happening now, both this side of my computer and wherever you are, each of us in our little hutches is experiencing something which cannot be repeated. Whatever's happening is unrepeatable. Just imagine that. And given that my words, like my life, are brief, what do I want to communicate, and how shall I try to do it? Well, I will try as best I can, and I hope that within all the shortfalls of that, something helpful will be communicated. Because I want to, as best I can, to have a conversation with you and to communicate what seems to matter. What I do hope you might remember and recall, or what I'd love for you to remember, recall and reflect on, or find helpful to your own explanations of your experience. Well, there's a few things I was thinking. If you were to kind of forget everything that I share with you, then maybe this list might help you. So life is brief. There's no opportunity except whatever it is, and who really knows what it is that's happening now. And that's not just an idea, it's actually true. It's true beyond any grasping. Life matters. Your life matters. Everybody's life matters. Our lives are unique. Whatever this is, we are in it together. Life and living it is a collective endeavour. But no one can be responsible for the work that I'm called to do, even although I need others and I need support. No one can be responsible for the work I'm called to do. And without exception, the birthright of all that is alive, the birthright of all living beings, is full freedom of body, speech and mind. So, kind of put another way, every life matters. All life matters. All actions have consequences. What will you do? What will I do? What are my intentions? If that's not helpful, then, you know, put another way, my life depends on yours. How do I want to live it? Or put another way, will I step into this life as fully as I can, just as I am? If I want to do that, how can I do that? So the kind of freedom that I'm referring to is always in relationship to life itself. The flow of life that knows no limit and that's dynamic and unbounded, open-hearted and free. It lets go into that flow. This kind of freedom calls to something that's within each and every one of us, that longs to be aware, that longs to be awake, and that longs to be alive. that longs to be in a truly loving relationship, a right relationship with ourselves and with others. Imagine that. I've got a poem that I wanted to read to you from Martha Graham. Some of you might know it, and if some of you want it, I'm sure that Vajra Chakshu can forward it on to you. So there is a vitality, a life force, an energy, a quickening that is translated into action. And because there is only one of you in all time, this expression is unique. And if you block it, it will never exist through any other medium, and it will be lost. The world will not have it. And it's not your business to determine how good it is, nor how valuable, nor how it compares to other expressions. It is your business to keep it yours, clearly and directly, to keep the channel open. You don't really even have to believe in yourself or your work. You have to keep open and aware directly to the urges that motivate you and to keep the channels open. So that was a kind of poem from Martha Graham, who was also, as some of you might know, a dancer. Yeah. So one of the difficulties with imagining freedom, and in this sense, I'm talking about freedom from shadows, and the shadows as being things which hinder us and that obscure us, that confuse us away from our freedom. So one of the difficulties with imagining freedom is the confusion, the ignorance, if you like, that we often hold, that freedom's a long, 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 long way away. That the world needs fixing first. That freedom can only be realized when I've sorted myself out, when they've sorted themselves out, when they change to be like me, or I change to be like them. That's just the short list. There's an endless list of obstacles which are imagined as real, that keep us from imagining and realizing freedom, that keep us from not just imagining, but from realizing what's actually going on. So I'm not sure how what this sounds like to you, or even if it makes sense. But I do trust that in speaking, and speaking from the heart, and in listening from the heart, something of value in our conversation, because this is a conversation, albeit not a regular one, will find its way through to us, will flow, and reach the heart in some way. And if it doesn't make any sense, just let it flow by, if it's not useful or helpful. So as I've pointed to, I think confusion is a shadow that permeates most of our experience. And to thoroughly see through our confusions is, in a sense, to see clearly in the dark. And as importantly, to be able to see clearly in what looks like the light. Light is not really white, and darkness is not really black. Shadows that keep us from freedom are present in both darkness and light. Shadows keep us from freedom, whether those shadows are visible or not. And they need to be seen through, and seen through clearly. And sometimes it can be easier to see them in darkness than it is to see them in light. I mean, one of the things about shadows is that, you know, really, in a way, they represent the way we've become distanced from the way things really are, the way that our lives have lost, if you like, the relationship to life itself. And that relationship to life itself, to the extent that we're in touch with that, we can realize that nothing, not as an abstract idea, but as a felt thing, that nothing is separate. And these shadows that keep us away from experiencing life more fully, they don't go away just because we ignore them. They don't go away despite any of our attempts to deny them or avoid them or disown them or condemn them. They're kind of present. The shadows that I'm kind of talking about are present, are within us until we can see them clearly. In one way or another, they're always calling for our attention. They're always calling to be seen. But while shadows are unavoidable, turning towards them helps us, provides us with a gateway to begin to see more clearly and to find our way back to right relationship with each other. Yeah, let me just check the time. I hope I'm not going too fast. Yeah, just 1 minute, something's happened on my screen. So I've lost you all. Hang on 1 minute. I've definitely lost you all. Are you coming back? You're all back. So, yeah, the enormity of our local and global situation, I find, I don't know if you do, but certainly I know that others can find it overwhelming. We can get consumed by what we cannot do and miss the positive actions that we can take. Really, at any time, in any situation, no matter what that situation or the conditions of that situation, regardless of how kind of tightly it feels or tightly held our lives feel, or however expansive our lives feel, really at any time, we can only do what's possible for us. We can only take the actions that we can take. And to do all that we can in this sense is to do all that's possible. And in doing all that's possible, as small as that might seem, its effects move beyond and are larger than anything we can seem to imagine. To do what's possible from this life out means that we can participate in life and be part of that flow of life that runs through all of us. We can begin to see that all actions, however small they seem, are crucial. They're absolutely crucial. So I kind of wanted to share something of a personal reflection of mine, and yeah, I kind of would have expressed in the past that I want to reduce my carbon footprint, that I want to purchase things more ethically, that I want to, and to some degree I have been doing that. But one of the consequences of this lockdown has been that I've been able to see more clearly what the relationship to the things I'm already doing, you know, that I was doing prior to the lockdown. By virtue of the lockdown, I can see those things more clearly. I can see what's held in those things more clearly. So I have always tried to source ethical produce. I've sourced grains and pulses from ethical shops where it's fair traded. I don't, you know, I don't do that all the time, but I have increasingly begun to do that. But one of the things that I realized that during the lockdown is that the chickpeas that I buy usually, the chickpeas and the kidney beans and the butter beans and the quinoa or the quinoa, depending on your how you say it, all of those things come from very, very far away. So what I've done locally, as well as looking at what it takes for those things to get to me, I've been looking at how I can, if it's possible, to reintroduce other things from that are more locally based into my buying. So that's been really interesting, because actually now I have hummus from Northumberland and I have quinoa from just the other side, somewhere in Essex. But you know, the footprint is kind of reduced, and also the amount of nuts that I'm eating, that I used to eat, was far larger than what I'm consuming now. And partly that's a consequence of having to, well, not having to, choosing to harvest hazelnuts when I've been in Spain, which is where I would usually be at this time of year. Kind of knowing what it takes to grow, for the earth to nourish the trees enough for the fruit to grow on these hazelnut trees, and to gather them and then shell them, knowing what it goes to take in, what goes into producing nuts, makes me really aware of my consumption of them. You know, if I had to shell every nut, I wouldn't be eating as many as I am. But you know, somehow I think it's different because other people are growing them and other people are producing them and other people are shelling them, and you know, and I'm paying a really low price for it. Yeah. But so one of the positive effects of the lockdown has been that I've been able to see what's held in some of the things I did, and how what the relationship of that is to our local and global situation. And you know, I've kind of changed my behavior as a consequence of it. I don't know, you might have other examples, or it might be something that you're curious about exploring yourselves. Yeah. So these are definitely unique times, and we are all in it together. I've been thinking and reflecting on how you're all as near to me, and I can feel it in my body now. Actually, I can feel it resonating at a visceral level. You know, you're all as near to me now as my family is. You know, you're inside my my house where I live. We're exchanging, something's happening here that is as near to me, if not nearer, than my family, who I can't, you know, many of whom I can't see and can't be in close contact with in this kind of way. And you're as near to me as many of the neighbours in my street. You know, I've seen, even in this short time, I've seen more of you than I have of them. Yeah. So I think these times do offer us an opportunity to see that beyond doubt, all of our actions, both big and small, have consequences, and that all our collective endeavours, big or small, matter. It does count. And we can only ever, anybody, everywhere, whatever they're involved in, can only start with beginning to see more clearly and beginning to act from and make choices which are influenced by how clearly they see and what kind of future they want. So our connections and relationships to ourselves, others, and the enormity of our local and global situation is visible now in a way that it hasn't in my lifetime been visible before. And these times will never happen again, and never in the same way, in a way that we haven't been ready for this, and that we have got the internet to communicate with. It is a real blessing, because we don't know what's going to happen for the future. This pandemic, you know, lets us know beyond doubt that what affects me affects you. We can see more clearly that single actions and the health and well-being of a single person can permeate not just individually but locally and globally. We can see more clearly what happens when we realize that we can't, you know, there's some things we can't control, that there's some things we can't, in terms of situations, that we can't kind of control the outcome. Yeah. So there's a great opportunity in this. And part of that opportunity is to see how vulnerable we ourselves are, and others are too. Our situation lets us know that we are all vulnerable. I think being vulnerable is part of the human condition, and that to experience it, engage in it, and be open to it, not just in oneself but in relation to others, helps reshape the kinds of lives not only that we lead but that are possible for this generation and for the next. I'm looking again at the clock. Yeah. So Buddhism itself provides us, sorry for the little absence there, I was just gathering my thoughts. So Buddhism provides us with lots of ways to see clearly, not just where we're coming from, but where we want to. That's the clock. Not just where we're coming from, but what we want to participate in and where we want to move towards too, both individually, collectively and locally and globally. I'm just going to set the clock again so I don't run over time. I hope it's not a sign of the times that this clock that I've never used before has got some suggested reminders. One is to brush teeth, one is to steam eggs, and the other is to put my face mask on. Okay. Yeah. So, yeah, Buddhism can provide us with ways of seeing clearly where we're coming from and where we want to go to. And whilst we're all in relationship and need the support of friends, as I've been suggesting, there's nobody that can tell us what to do. No one can bear witness and see our own minds as we do. Yeah, nobody can bear witness or see our own minds as we do. In the end, we're responsible for our own mind and the choices we make, and also the way we come into relationship with others. And there we can begin to have a kind of shared collective endeavor with some consciously expressed and joint a clarity in terms of what we share in terms of objectives. So Buddhism helps us to experience life with more openness and supports us to see more clearly. And as we turn towards ourself, we can become self-aware, self-regarding, and crucially in doing so, other-regarding as well. The intention and consequence is to see more clearly, be more aware, awake, and alive. So if you're not feeling more awake, you're not feeling aware, and you're not feeling alive, then maybe kind of look at how to support being more awake, being more aware, being more alive. Meditation is a way to help. And in Buddhism, we've got the mindfulness of breathing and the metta bhavana, where we can explore and give attention, put our intention on being awake to the breath, mindful of our intentions, wanting to open up to a loving response to the world. And as we begin to see shadows and to see through our confusions and any idea about what's going on to what's actually happening, we can bear witness to ourselves and others and become more conscious and see clearly what we're involved in, what our relationship to ourselves, others, and the world is. So I know that some of the things that I've experienced, I know from some of the things that I've experienced recently that I'm confused, that, you know, I'm not as clear as I thought I was. I know more clearly that I want to be free of that confusion. And I can see more clearly when I pay attention to shadows, a gateway back into a more conscious, aware and awake life. In paying attention to shadows and in looking at the relationship of, you know, what's held in our actions, I've recognized the extent to which, if you like, I've lost my relationship, not only to myself, but also I've lost relationship with my connection and relationship to others. So shadows have provided me a gateway back into relationship. Now, on a personal note, that's not been entirely easy, because these times are really demanding. And whilst paying attention to shadows, to those things that we ignore, that we kind of put to one side, that we would rather weren't us, that we would rather wasn't happening, to the extent that I've paid attention to those kinds of shadows, and to the extent that I've turned towards them, it's provided me with a way back into full relationship and into right relationship with myself, others, and, you know, what's really important in terms of the way I want to live my life and the way I want to create conditions for other people to live their lives. But it's really demanding, because the world is quite a terrifying place at times. And I wanted to share with you something which, you know, I viscerally now, kind of at a bodily level, I can feel it. I'm kind of, in my mind, I'm going, no, you've said enough, stop, don't go there. But I do want to share this with you, even although it's quite difficult to do it. And on hearing it, sorry, I need to just scratch that. On hearing it, you might think, oh, that's not that difficult to say. But hopefully you'll get a sense of what I'm talking about, how difficult it was for me to do what might seem a small thing to you, but for me was quite a big thing. So, yeah. So I want a world that's free. I want a world that's kind of open and loving. I want something that's compassionate. And I really engage with that in all sorts of different ways. But what happens when I'm called to something where I do feel vulnerable and where I don't quite know what to do? So on the news recently, I've been limiting my watching of the news, because it can be quite overwhelming. But on the day that I chose to watch the news, there was a clip of George Floyd with the clip of the police officer putting his knee forcibly onto George Floyd's neck, and as a consequence of which George Floyd died. Now, there was something in watching that which really called to me to do something more than just observe this, that really called me to do something more than just watch this. I felt deeply uncomfortable, and I knew that on one level I couldn't change it, but on another level I wanted to bear witness to something. I wanted to stand and without any sense of violence, just express my a solidarity of presence to something in these times. So there have been lots of different things going on in terms of responding to that situation, and people have chosen to put their energies in different ways. And there was a call out in the local community and more nationally for people to come out on the doorstep, on your own doorstep at 7 o'clock, the Thursday that's just gone and show solidarity in some way, singing or having in the background a song, which if we got time, and I'll check with Fajr Chakshu if we have time at the end of me speaking, I'll just play a little bit of. So that sounds quite simple, doesn't it? But actually, it was an incredibly difficult thing to do, because it required of me that I stepped into something where I knew I couldn't control it. I could choose to do something, but I didn't know quite what was going to happen after it. And the things that went through my mind, well, it's a particular kind of street, so therefore some people come and some people won't, and it won't really make any difference, and it won't. But there was this thing in me that really called for me to, in some way, bear witness, and not just do that in a way that recognized my individual responsibility and where I am in it, but also stepped into something where I was doing something publicly, where I wasn't just keeping it to myself. So anyway, the short thing of it is that I went out onto the street, and I had all these fears, because on the street that I live, there's on one side of the street, there's a row of houses, which is fairly mixed, predominantly white. On the side of the street that I live on, it's predominantly white, a mixture of houses that are privately owned and some that are rented. It's not entirely white. And on the other side of the street, there's a range of the same thing. And then in the middle of it, there's a housing estate, and the community in that housing estate is more diverse than anywhere else in the street. So I knew that if I went out, I would be visible to the community. That had been directly affected by this. This is where mindfulness helps, because it helps you to remember to come back. Yeah. So, yeah, I was aware that the people that I would meet were the people in the street that had been directly affected in a different way by virtue of this thing we call race and colour and privilege, in a very different way. But I did go out, and although I was worried about what might be found, and I didn't really know what I was going to do, what I found happened when I allowed myself to spontaneously engage in it in ways that weren't too overly concerned. I was gifted by not, I didn't want to make anything right. I just wanted to be present. So I didn't want to make anything right, but I did want to be present to something. So I looked through my old stuff and my old music that I used to listen to, and I got something out, and it was a song from Bob Marley, and I played that on the street, and I held my banner, Black Lives Matter, All Lives Matter. And it was incredible, the response from people on the street. There were some white people there, but there were a few black people there. They were surprised to see me, and I was surprised of their response. And there was something in that where there was a mutual solidarity. There was a solidarity there. And I mention it now because sometimes it's really hard to step into that space because it's uncomfortable. Those kinds of spaces, not this particular one, but whatever is uncomfortable for you, and it will be different for each of us. But sometimes what we imagine is not what we find. And sometimes what we find cuts through any kind of confusion, anything that hides us from what's really going on. Yeah. Okay. So I hope you get a sense of why that's an important thing for me to share. And actually in sharing it, I feel quite vulnerable. But, you know, I kind of have come to know that vulnerability, whilst it can arrive as a fear or together with fear and anxiety, really when it takes its coat off, it's a great strength. And it's something that we can share. You know, it's part of humanity. So yeah, somehow in the midst of your lives, whatever it is, you found time to be here. You know, we kind of each share the human condition. The Buddha shared the human condition. He wasn't free of it. You know, his shadow didn't depart. The Buddha had shadows, but in seeing clearly, those shadows reveal themselves, transition to something else. We can see more clearly. Each life is unique and is irreplaceable. An ancient practitioner who we could talk a great deal about, called Vimla said, "I am sick because all beings are sick," and that sickness would remain until all beings are well. The path to recovery, using that language, is made by the small actions that each individual takes, which brings us in relationship to each other, and not just on a local level, but on a global level, not just in relation to what's happening inside, but in what we choose to put our energies into outside. And that overwhelm, you know, when I went to Terazoe, to do the retreat with Vajrachakshu, prior to doing that, I'd done a photographic project and installation on the refugee community. And a lot of that work looked at some of the work on Lesvos. And when I got to Terazoe, because I said yes to coming to Istanbul and doing that, but I didn't really know what that meant. And when I got to Terazoe and I found myself on the shore of the waters that reach out to this very land that I'd been talking about, and to see that mass of water that people had tried to cross over, it was helpful for me to be reminded of, or to have come to me at that time, a really strong felt sense of Avalokiteshvara. You know, Avalokiteshvara was a bodhisattva whose purpose was compassion, and that compassion arises naturally in the world when we engage in suffering, that each one of us has something simple to offer in relation to ourselves and in relation to others in terms of compassion. What I also, so that swell of water near Tarazoe for me became like Avalokiteshvara's tears. And from the tears of Avalokiteshvara, what was born was Tara, green Tara. Now, green Tara is the, will not be stopped by my clock. Green Tara represents, is a bodhisattva, compassion, and stepping from a place of, if you like, confidence, stillness, into wherever suffering is present. Now that can sound a bit overwhelming, but actually with Tara, what she does is she steps to whatever is in front of her. She doesn't step, you know, she doesn't catch a bus to get to wherever in order to meet something. She's present to whatever's right there in front of her. And that for me is helpful in not becoming too overwhelmed by our situation. Because if I can just respond to myself and to others that are in front of me as compassionately as I can, as best as I can, just as I am, then this world that we imagine, the world it's the only world worth working for and worth fighting for, then that world will not just become a dream for the future, but will actually become something in the present through those interactions. So yeah, each life is irreplaceable and unique. And the ever-changing, though it is, the earth that we walk on, the earth that you stand on, is the same earth that I stand on. You know, and the relationship of us to the earth and to each other is something that we can come to engage with and participate in fully. The breath and the air that we breathe is the same air that we breathe. And yeah, I just, there was one poem that I was going to read, and I hope people can see the positive aspect of that, because for me it really is a positive thing. It's the uses of sorrow, the uses of sorrow by Mary Oliver. So the uses of sorrow. Someone I loved gave me a box of darkness. It took me years to understand that this too was a gift. Someone I loved gave me a box full of darkness. It took me years to understand that this too was a gift. I think I'm out of time. Well, not out of time. I think that's all the time. I think that's it. So let me just see. There was. So yeah, I haven't. Maybe you've got a sense of, you know, living life fully and consciously with positive intentions, that can result in happiness. certainly, although I describe my choice to stand on my own doorstep and do what I did, it was certainly uncomfortable and it was certainly painful, but I was definitely happy. I was definitely happy, not only to have done it, but to have been present in a way that I'm not normally. So this turning towards shadows can result in something that's dynamic, alive and creative, that's playful, that sees the joy in things. And in this sense is like a shadow that never departs. So that's it, Vajrachakshu.